Welcome to the program. This is Conversations. Thanks so much for being along with us today. I'm your host, Lizz Sommars. Conversations is a public affairs program of this station, and we look at a wide range of issues that affect individuals, families, our community, and the nation. On today's program, America's obesity epidemic. What's causing it? My guest is Jonathan Bailor, who has looked at decades worth of research on this issue. Hello, Jonathan. Thanks for coming on the program today.
Thank you, Liz. It's a pleasure to be here.
The top looming health crises of the 21st century in America are sure to be obesity and type 2 diabetes. And whatever way you look at it, the numbers are staggering. The prevalence of type 2 diabetes in America has tripled since the 1980s. In 2010, there were 27 million Americans with diabetes and 67 million with prediabetes. And going hand in hand with diabetes is the obesity epidemic. It is estimated that by 2020, 1 in every 2 Americans will be obese, yet it is the leading cause of preventable death in the U.S. and around the world. Obesity affects not only more and more adults, but a growing number of children and adolescents as well. What's caused this obesity epidemic? Is there a discrepancy between the way nutrition and health information is presented to the public and the science behind it? And if so, who is benefiting from that? My guest this morning has spent the past decade analyzing academic research related to diet, exercise, and weight loss, and believes the answers to these questions and ultimately the way to address the obesity epidemic lie in the scientific data itself. He writes about the physiology of weight loss, health, and fitness in the book, The Smarter Science of Slim. His website is thesmarterscienceofslim.com. Jonathan, first of all, advances in science have allowed us to accomplish some really remarkable tasks. Combating horrible childhood diseases, mapping the human genome, organ transplants. So why haven't we been able to get a handle on the obesity issue?
Liz, we have. The sad thing is that information just hasn't been disseminated to the public. Just as heart transplants are not performed the same way they were 40 years ago, and doctors know that, the way that obesity is thought of in the research community and in the scientific community has changed dramatically in the past 40 years. We're just not told about it. There
are hundreds, if not thousands, of diet and fitness books out there on the market over time, and especially right now in the last 5-10 years. A lot of them claim scientific information behind some of their findings. So how did you go about finding the science that either was or wasn't behind many of these fitness and diet weight loss claims?
I actually didn't look too much at the existing theories out there. In fact, what makes the Smarter Science of Slim a bit unique is we started from nothing and we said, what has the scientific community proven? Let's go in with no assumptions and let's see what the data lays out. 10 years later and 1,100 research studies later, we arrived at a surprising and somewhat counterintuitive conclusion about the cause of and solution to obesity.
Mm-hmm. So if the science behind successful weight loss has been out there all this time, why hasn't it been brought to light in the way that it is now?
The challenge is the people that are doing this research are researchers. I mean, just like you and I don't necessarily know about advancements that have been made in treating heart attacks. Obesity is a medical condition, and people who spend their lives researching it aren't the people writing the back of cereal boxes and aren't the people on the late night infomercials and aren't even the people on talk shows. So what really impassions me is to work with these individuals to take their data and to get it out there to the world so that people like you and I can benefit from it.
How did you find these people? I mean, where did you start to look? How did this all kind of come together?
It goes way back, actually, to high school because I became really formally interested in health and fitness. Back then, I actually became a personal trainer as early as high school. So that was my first foray into the sort of formal health and fitness world. Mm-hmm. But in working with clients, I quickly began to realize how ineffective traditional approaches were in the long term. My clients would work with me, they'd get results, but then they'd go about living their regular life and gain all the weight back and then some because I was telling them to do something unsustainable. Starve themselves and spend up to 2 hours a day exercising, which realistically, not going to happen in today's culture, nor should it. I mean, we're not meant to live in a state of starvation. So after seeing that and after basically failing with traditional knowledge, I looked the only place I had left, and that was the academic research community. And you'd be surprised, researchers generally don't get a lot of media attention. So when you call a researcher up and you say, hey, I read your study on XYZ, that's great work. Can you tell me a bit more about it? They're usually like, well, thank you. I'd be happy to tell you a bit more about it. And that just began a 10-year journey of just reading and reading and reading and speaking with these researchers. And it impassioned me because it was so counter to what I was taught as a personal trainer. In some ways, I was almost trying to rationalize in my brain this discrepancy, so it just fed me to keep reading and researching more.
Let's talk about some of the myths or conventional wisdom, quote unquote, that's been out there for a while that sounds right on the level of it, but you say it is really misinformation. To lose weight, you just got to eat less and exercise more.
And this is the biggest myth out there without question, Liz, because if we just eat less of a diet which causes us to have suboptimal health and fitness, that's a bit like touching a burner on a stove more gently to avoid burning ourselves, right? I mean, that's not solving the problem. There's a common misconception that if we just eat less and exercise more, our body has to burn fat. People often say the law of thermodynamics proves this, right? Energy can't be created nor destroyed. It can only change forms. There's a big assumption there, and that's if the body is in a state of caloric deficit, not to sound too technical, that it has to burn fat. That's not true. What research has actually proven is that when the body is starving, first, it goes into a state of malnutrition, which is obviously horrible for our health. Second, it slows down. This is why when we starve ourselves, we feel sleepy and terrible and groggy and crabby. If that's not enough to balance us out, our body will then burn muscle tissue. Why? We're in a state of caloric shortage. What's it going to burn off? It's going to burn off calorie-hungry tissue. Can't burn off our brain, can't burn off our heart, but it can burn off our muscle tissue. If that's not enough, then and only then will we burn fat. But at what cost? We've slowed ourselves down and we burned off our muscle tissue. If we want to keep fat off our body, those are the two last things we would ever want to do. So in reality, eating less and exercising more, unless we're able to keep it up for the rest of our lives, which in 95% of cases studies show we're not, we're actually setting ourselves up for long-term fat gain and worsened health.
And kind of along these same lines is a calorie is a calorie is a calorie is a calorie, and they're all the same.
Absolutely. And this is where we see people at work, I'll just skip lunch and eat these cupcakes that people brought in because, hey, I'm just not, this is my lunch. The problem is that a calorie is not a calorie at all. The calorie quality matters immensely, both in the nutrition it provides us and especially the hormonal reaction these calories cause in our body. And we know this. We feel differently eating 300 calories of Twinkies than we do after eating 300 calories of non-starchy vegetables and lean protein, for example.
And we're going to talk about this hormonal thing that eating bad foods does for us in detail in just a minute. But I'm curious about over on the fitness side of this then. Popular wisdom is you must work out often and for long periods of time in order to lose the weight. You just got to get in the gym.
And that, again, is based on that calories in, calories out assumption. Exercising less is the same, exercising more is fundamentally the same as eating less. It's just working on depriving our body of calories. What we really need to do to change our health and fitness in the long term is change the hormonal balance in our body. And that is only achieved by increasing the quality rather than the quantity of our exercise. Think about it trying to move a table. For example, you can push gently on a table once, twice, 1,000, 1,000,000 times. The table will never move. But if you give it one forceful, high-quality push, then it will move. When it comes to triggering the hormones which yield lasting benefit in our body, we need less but more forceful and safer exercise in order to cause that hormonal change in our body.
Okay, back on the food for just a minute, and then we will talk some more about exercise. The USDA food pyramid has been around for a very, very long time, emphasizing grains, then vegetables, meats, and then finally fats and sweets are at the top, but with a real emphasis on grain consumption. So based on the research that you have been able to discover, what is fundamentally wrong about the USDA food pyramid?
The food pyramid and their more recent redesign, the My Plate, continues this assumption. And Liz, it really is an assumption that we need to eat grain. There is nothing, and this is a scientific fact, there is nothing uniquely nutritional about grain. There are things, for example, that are only really found in meats or seafoods or vegetables or fruits. That is not true for grain. anything that a grain can do, this is fact, can be done by non-starchy vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, non-grain, better than it can be done by grain. We are often told grain is a great source of fiber. Spinach has 10 times more fiber than flour. Cocoa, the primary ingredient in chocolate, has 3 times more fiber, calorie per calorie, than whole wheat flour.
Oh my goodness.
So grains, and the challenge is grains also have a lot of bad characteristics. What they do to our body hormonally is simply disastrous. So when you combine a lack of unique nutritional value with caloric density and hormonal detriment, you end up with, well, what we've got on our hands today, and that's a obesity and diabetes epidemic.
So the push now toward whole grains, still bad, or maybe worse. I don't know.
Well, it's a bit like saying, I'd rather have 1 broken leg than 2. It's true. Whole grains are better for you than refined grains, but there's still that assumption that we have to eat grains. It's like, well, what's the best grain? That's the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is, what has science proven to be the best foods? Who said grain is one of those? You know, so it's not about what's the healthiest grain. It's about what's the healthiest food. But our government doesn't seem to be asking that question.
What about cultures that are grain dependent, like Japanese people eat a lot of rice? Italians have their pasta. I'm not sure exactly what the obesity epidemic is like there, but I know traditionally for the Japanese culture, Japanese people have been known to be on the slim side. How do you reconcile a diet that is based on rice and there's not seemingly an obesity issue there?
Well, there's 2 important factors that combine to cause obesity issues, and that's poor quality of calories and overeating. So if you take in a poor quality of calories, but you do not overeat, you may not become obese. You will not achieve optimal health. There's plenty of examples of individuals who are starving, frankly, like in 2nd or 3rd world countries, who look obese. However, again, the quality of their food is not up to par. So in cultures where these substances are consumed in moderation, we're not seeing this problem because, again, they're consumed in moderation. And it's not to say that if we eat grains, we're going to die tomorrow. That's obviously not true. But what it is to say is if we're looking for causes to the problem we're facing, grains are a great place to look.
Jonathan Bailor is my guest on Conversations, and we're talking about America's obesity epidemic and what scientific research says about losing weight, health, and fitness. He is author of the book, The Smarter Science of Slim. There is a lot more to come on this issue on Conversations, so I hope you'll stay with us. Welcome back to Conversations. Good to have you along with us today. I'm Lizz Sommars. What's causing America's obesity epidemic? That's the issue we are looking at in this half hour with nutrition researcher Jonathan Bailor. It's estimated that by 2020, 1 in every 2 Americans will be obese, yet it is the leading cause of preventable death in the U.S. and around the world. Jonathan has spent the last 10 years analyzing what the academic research says when it comes to diet, exercise, and weight loss. He writes about his findings in the book, The Smarter Science of Slim. His website is thesmarterscienceofslim.com. Let's talk a little bit about how this whole push toward high carbohydrate, low fat got out into the public. Ancel Keys, I believe his name was.
Yes.
And it had to do with prevailing heart disease information at the time. But he was a pivotal person, if I understand correctly, in launching this whole maybe decade or more of time nutritionally that was really focused on eating high carb, low fat. And what that does to us nutritionally.
So you're exactly right. The brief history is in earlier in the 20th century. An individual named Ancel Keys performed a now famous study where he collected data from, I'm a little foggy on the details, but over 20 countries, and then picked 6 and reported on those 6. And the reason he picked those 6 is because they showed a positive correlation between total fat intake and the incidence of heart disease issues. And then he dug further in his data and said, well, those people also had higher total cholesterol, and fat seems to correlate with cholesterol. Therefore, fat causes heart disease. Don't eat fat. If you look at his entire sample set, that conclusion is invalid. In fact, if you pick 7 different countries from his sample set, you can show an inverse relationship between fat consumption and heart disease incidence. But in the absence of bloggers to call him on his faulty reporting, that he ended up on the cover of Time magazine, and it became a rallying cry for our country. And then when you pile on top of that the fact that producing starch and sweetener heavy foods that are low in fat is incredibly profitable because they don't need to be refrigerated. They can be processed. They can be manufactured into food-like products. You end up with a cycle where you have the quote unquote scientific community telling you to do something, the food manufacturing industry saying absolutely, and we end up where we are today, whereas researchers have, the Harvard Medical School is on the forefront of saying, in fact, there's an inverse relationship between the consumption of unsaturated fats and heart disease, meaning the more of them you eat, the less heart disease you have. And most cutting edge research is showing that even certain types of saturated fats, like those found in coconuts, for example, medium chain triglycerides, are also showing an inverse relationship with negative health issues. The data that is coming out today is showing that starches and sweets, especially sweets, are the fundamental cause of what we're experiencing today, because fat, we need fat. Our hormones are manufactured from fat. Our cells require fat. We need fat. Fat doesn't make you fat, just like eating green vegetables doesn't make you green.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how your body metabolizes fat. And you talk about a set point rather than a calorie balance model, and how once we get to a higher weight and stay there by eating unhealthy foods, why that's so powerful in keeping us overweight.
The set point is best understood by replacing the current model we have in our brains for how our bodies work, which is like a balance, which I'm sure you're familiar with, right? Calories in, calories out. Our body works like a balance. If we instead think of our bodies like a sink, where if we put more water in a sink, what happens? More water drains. The water level in a sink only rises when the sink becomes clogged. And what clogs a sink? Putting the wrong quality of stuff in the sink. No quantity of water will ever clog a sink. But when a sink becomes clogged, any quantity will cause the water level to rise. And we can bail water out, but the water level's still staying risen. We don't solve the problem until we clear that hormonal clog, or in our bodies, what's called a hormonal clog. Our bodies work the same way. When we eat the wrong quality of food, primarily starches and sweets, it creates a hormonal clog in our body. And our body starts to believe that the set or the water level or fat level our body should carry on it becomes elevated. And our body starts to defend that point. That's why we can get the flu, lose 20 pounds, change nothing about our diet, and then somehow gain it all back. And that's also why we know people who eat a lot of food, don't really exercise, and still stay slim. How does that work?
Genetics.
Well, you're right. Genetics is half of it. Their hormonal balance is the other half. And what researchers are showing is that chronically elevated body composition or body fat levels is caused due to this hormonal clog, which causes our set point or the body composition our bodies think we should have to rise. And the solution is through improved eating quality and improved exercise quality, because quality caused the problem. Quality will solve the problem. Quantity will never do that. It's like turning the water down in a clogged sink. The problem is the clog. The solution is removing the clog.
And the solution is eating what you call sane foods as opposed to insane foods. So just give us a few examples of each. I mean, insane foods, I can guess what you're going to say there, but give just a little bit of a differentiation between those two.
Well, and SANE foods, SANE is just an acronym for the 4 factors that scientifically prove that a calorie isn't a calorie: satiety, aggression, nutrition, and efficiency. Calories in foods vary in those 4 factors. The common denominator among SANE foods is that they're rich in water, fiber, and protein. So SANE foods are wet, fiber-rich, and protein-packed. Non-starchy vegetables, spinach, kale, lettuce, any kind of seafood, lean, organic, grass-fed meats, cottage cheese, plain Greek yogurt, eggs, nuts, seeds, berries, citrus fruits, basically things you find on the perimeter of a grocery store, things that need to be refrigerated. Insane foods are dry, low in fiber, and relatively low in protein. Things you find in the center of the grocery store, starches and sweets, things that don't need to be refrigerated.
A lot of tan foods, huh?
A lot of tan, a lot of white foods.
Yeah.
Yes.
About sugar. Sugar, of course, is an insane food, and probably there's no amount of it that is quote unquote good for us. Are we going to find in the next 5 or 10 years what damage to our body now all of these fake sugars are doing? You've got your Splendas and, chemical variants of sugar, at least that's what the manufacturers say. But if we're taking sugar out of our diet, is there any safe fake sugar?
Safe is, I don't know if I can say safe. Let's put, but we
preferable.
Can do preferable. Well, no, there is. I mean, my father and sister both work in addictions counseling, which is actually, it's an interesting field because researchers have proven that sugar causes an addictive characteristic in our brain, like a low dose of morphine. Sugar addiction is a proven condition. And when you go SANE, you'll experience it firsthand because you'll go through withdrawal. You'll feel really crappy for 2 days, but then you'll feel great. When we talk about weaning ourselves off sugar, we have to think about risk minimization. So, if someone's smoking 2 packs a day, smoking 1 pack a day is better, without question. So if you need to sweeten things, non-caloric sweeteners are unequivocally better for you. When consumed in mass quantities, unrealistic quantities, they've shown to do damaging things. But caloric sweeteners, when consumed in any quantity, have been shown to do damaging things. So my recommendation would be transition from caloric sweeteners to non-caloric sweeteners, preferably natural ones such as Truvia. And then as you can, wean yourself off of those. But again, if your goal isn't perfection, I wrote this book. I still use non-caloric sweeteners because I'm not willing to go the rest of my life without them. I don't use them as much as I used to, but they're certainly much better, especially from a hormonal perspective, than caloric sweeteners.
Okay, we should just mention, if people aren't aware, Truvia is a form of stevia, which is an herb that is used as a sweetener. We talked about some of the nutritional misinformation or myths that have been out there. Let's talk a little bit also about exercise myths. We touched on a few earlier, like you've got to get to the gym and you've got to work out really hard and you've got to become an endurance runner if you ever want to burn off the fat. But the type of exercise you alluded to earlier, and it's using all your muscles in a short burst of energy to move something. Tell us a little bit about the exercise model that research has shown to be most beneficial or more beneficial to the human body than just getting out there and jogging every day.
So again, it's surprising because it's so counterintuitive in some sense, but think about, just like we have different muscles on our body to do different things. Our leg muscles do different things than our arm muscles. We actually have different fibers within our muscles. For example, we have what's called type 1A muscle fibers. These allow us to do a little bit of work for a long period of time. Talk, type, walk. They're involved with high quantity, low quality. On the other end of the spectrum, we have type 2B muscle fibers. These allow us to generate a lot of force, but for a very short period of time. Obviously, there's an inverse relationship between the quantity and the quality of exercise we can do. We can't sprint for as long as we can walk. The important thing to note, though, is that these type 2B muscle fibers, these are the muscle fibers which, when worked, cause this hormonal reaction, which clears this hormonal clog and lowers the weight at which our body thinks we should maintain. But the only way to activate these fibers is to perform a type of exercise which requires a lot of force. And an exercise that requires a lot of force, by definition, cannot be done in high quantity. And it's not about going outside and sprinting. There are ways to do this that are incredibly safe. For example, we can do what's called eccentric training, which is like weight lifting, but it's actually weight lowering, where you very slowly and controlled lower a dramatic amount of resistance, which is amazingly safe because it is so slow and it is so controlled. When people get injured exercising, it's generally during jerky movements. This is a very slow, it's almost like a yoga, but a strength training yoga. And by doing that, we work different muscle fibers and cause a different and much more promising result in our body.
And because it is so difficult to do, comparatively to a light, easy exercise, your muscles are going to get fatigued much quicker, and that's part of the good.
And
if I understand it correctly,
fatigued much more severely. You're not exercising. The book, the catchphrase of the book is "Eat more, exercise less, smarter." And the smarter is the catch. It's like eat more sane foods so that you're too full for insane foods, and exercise less but smarter. Where that just means if we're exercising to cause a maximal hormonal change in our body, we will be so sore that we will not be able to exercise. We'll actually have a challenge moving for 3 days afterwards.
Oh, wow.
Because think about it, if you can exercise frequently, by definition, it's really not having that big of an impact on your body. So it's not about exercising less because we're lazy. It's about exercising less because we're too sore to do more.
So is there a place for cardio at all?
When we talk about cardio in the sense of long duration, if our goal is to be cardiovascularly fit, meaning if we want to run a 5K, then the best way to do that is to train for a 5K. And if walking around all day is fantastic for you, but think about it like there's specific types of training for specific types of goals. If your goal is to cause hormonal change, which will cause lasting health benefit in your body, then it's this eccentric, high-quality exercise you want to do. If your goal is aerobic endurance, then aerobic endurance training is effective for you. And if your goal is just to be able to walk 10,000 steps a day without getting winded, then walk 10,000 steps a day and you won't get winded. So it's about picking the right exercise for your goals.
If you'd like to learn more about the work of my guest today, Jonathan Bailor, you can go to his website, thesmarterscienceofslim.com, or read about it in his book, The Smarter Science of Slim. Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the program today.
My pleasure.
And join us again next weekend when we explore other topics on the program. I hope you'll join us then. I'm Liz Sommars, and this is Conversations.